Well, hello there. So, today we're going to talk about conflict. The idea where in a story you have two opposing forces that are messing with each other. This is what makes stories interesting. If there's no conflict, then the story is flat, the story is boring. So, conflict is really what changes the path of the story. So, we have looked at the idea of the plot chart, and you can see it's only when you get to the conflict right here where the story changes. Okay? When we talk about stories, it's that conflict that gets us as readers, if we're watching a TV or a movie, TV show or movie, that's what gets us interested because the conflict is what creates the drama. So basically, conflict is a disagreement or an argument. This can be between two people fighting. In literature, the conflict is a literary device characterized by the struggle between two opposing forces. Conflict provides the crucial tension in any story and is used to drive the narrative forward. So once you hit that conflict, that's what changes the path of the story. So, the first thing we're going to talk about is the idea of internal conflict, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's this idea of your conflict within yourself. We have the picture here of Kronk with his angel and demon, and this symbolizes the conscience going inside of him and of all of us, right? Should I do this bad thing? Should I do this good thing? Bad thing, good thing, bad thing. And we're conflicted. We don't know. We probably want to do the good thing, but the bad thing sounds fun or has advantages. So, internal conflict is when a character battles within themselves. Um, for example, if you find a wallet on the street, right? Do you keep the money or do you turn it into the police? And that internal conflict, what should I do? What should I do? Well, I could keep the money and nobody would see me, nobody knows, but that's wrong and it's bad and I should give it back. So, that internal conflict, the conflict within yourself. All right. Takes us to the next one, which is external conflict. This is outside of yourself, which is most of the kinds of conflicts out there. When a character battles against something beyond their control. Okay, it can be another character, another person. It can be a variety of other kind of external factors as well. Okay, something outside the character. So, internal and external conflict. You need to know those words, internal and external conflict. Internal is inside yourself, external is outside of yourself or the character. So, here are the 6 major categories of conflict that we like to talk about in literature. So, character versus self, that's the internal conflict, where the character is fighting throughout the story with themselves. Sometimes this comes in the form of mental conflict, right? Like the character literally is maybe losing their mind and they're trying to grasp onto reality, but for whatever reason, their mind is struggling with that. Okay, that's going to be that internal conflict. Or it's the internal emotional conflict. You feel sad, you feel happy. You feel sad, you feel happy. Things like that. That character versus self. Character versus character, external conflict, 2 characters are fighting. Character versus nature. Again, it's external conflict because it's outside of the character. Character versus nature. A storm, earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, all of these are nature. It could be a character versus animals, right? Fighting against animals. All the animals in the zoo were left out. Now you got to fight and try and control nature. Weather, animals. All right. The next one is character versus God. Usually it's God, but it also can encompass not just the big G God, but little G God. The idea of the supernatural, fate, and we'll talk more about this in more detail. But it can be the God that, if you know, Judeo-Christian God that you might think of as like God over the entire universe, or lesser gods, Greek myths. Or if you watch the Marvel movies with Thor, he would be like a little g kind of god. All right, characters versus technology. And this is kind of a new category in this, but we see it more and more where the problem comes from technology working or not working. So that's an interesting one. And then character versus society, the world around the character, whether it's the world of the family and the family wants the character to do something, whether it's the state or the country, or whether it's just all people in general and the way in which we do things, character versus society. Okay, and those are, as you can see, most conflicts are external. It's only when it's character versus self that it's internal. So here are some examples. Character versus self. We see a little bit of man versus self, character versus self in the Scarlet Ibis, as the narrator feels bad about how he treated Doodle. And he is kind of like, I wasn't a good brother, and I have the stream of love and the stream of hate, and they flow next to each other, right? They're both inside of him. So we get a little bit of that in the Scarlet Ibis. Students in the past have pointed out that in The Necklace, isn't there character versus self in The Necklace? Maybe. I'm going to say mostly not. And the reason is Matilda never seems to care that she's arrogant and selfish. She never actually acts like she feels bad that she ruined her family. So maybe there's glimpses of it, but I don't think there's much in The Necklace. So far, the Scarlet Ibis is the one that has character versus self. Character versus character. Okay, this is as common as Batman versus the Joker, Superman versus Lex Luthor. We got Merida and her mother Eleanor. If you've watched the movie Brave, right, the characters are fighting. The big one that stands out to me is in the Interlopers. Ulrich versus George. Two men are in the forest and they're going to fight to the death. Now you might be thinking, yes, Mr. de Klerk, but then the tree falls on them and the wolves come. Isn't that character versus nature? Bingo. You can have multiple types of conflict in a story. In fact, often, the more conflict in a story like that, the more interesting it is. You can have character versus character and character versus nature in the same story. And it's interesting to see how they all work together. So, character versus character, we got the interlopers and the characters fighting against each other. In the Scarlet Ibis, we have a little bit of Doodle pushing back against the brother, but only a little bit. The brother does, as Doodle does love his older brother, and it's really Doodle just saying, I physically can't keep up. So not much character in the Scarlet Ibis. All right, character versus nature. The character has to battle through some sort of natural event. Animals, storms, floods, earthquakes. They have to fight against these things. So stories like Jaws, or although I've never seen it, the movie San Andreas with the idea of the earthquake. Lots of movies have this character versus nature story. So the interlopers, as I mentioned, the storm was raging, the tree traps the men, the wolves attack. Those are elements of character versus nature in that story. The Scarlet Ibis, same thing. The storm rages. Would Doodle have made it if there was no storm? Possibly. That storm certainly complicated and added a level of conflict for the characters. That without the storm, maybe they wouldn't have been in such a rush. Okay. Character versus God, the supernatural, or fate. And again, it depends on what's going on in the story. Most of the Greek myths have a man versus a god. In some ways, Batman versus Superman can fit this mold, right? Because Batman is a man and Superman has godlike qualities to him. He is from another planet. He's got this superhuman strength. So we talked about the story of Job already, and sometimes that's seen as man versus God because Job cries out, says, God, what's happening? All right. Fate, or this higher power, can act in God-like ways. So it doesn't have to be a God, but it's this idea of power outside of regular normal life, something that's supernatural, something that occurs outside of the normal, everyday kind of boundaries and expectations of normal life. So magic can sometimes fall into this. Alien power can be that supernatural power, almost a godlike power. Um, in the story, The Necklace, Matilda, the first line says that if she was born by an error of fate, it's not a major part of the story, but it is a part of the story. That idea that fate is what had a major influence on her life. All right, character versus technology. This is one of my favorites. I love this conflict. I love Frankenstein. It's such a good story. And it's this idea of, if I can use technology, and even though this was written in 1818, still they were talking about technology and electricity and reanimating dead life. Can you bring this back with the power of invention, right? Technology. Okay. In Frankenstein, it says man can, but it doesn't ask whether man should. And Frankenstein's got that because it's got character versus God as well. Character versus technology. It's got the character versus character. That's why I love Frankenstein. So good. All right, lots of stories. If you've ever read The Giver, you know that there's that idea of the technology there, and then of course the Terminator movies, and lots and lots and lots of this. The story Blues Ain't No Mockingbird, which we did read, has some of this conflict, right? Granny says, get those men out of here, get the cameraman out of here. And then she tells the story of the other cameraman taking pictures. So part of that conflict is this idea of technology invading and influencing our lives. So stop for just a moment. I'm going to go off on this tangent, right? But when you think of Blues Ain't No Mockingbird and pictures, think about how many selfies you take in a day, how many pictures you share on Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, whatever it is, and the influence of technology in our daily lives. Think about how many times you have fought with your mom and dad over your cell phone, and how many teachers say, put that away. Anyway, that battle of technology, it's everywhere. One of my favorites to read about. And then character versus society. It's when the society, the government, the culture is against you. And someone is trying to radically change things about the way we live. So we've got To Kill a Mockingbird coming up. And one of the elements in that story is Atticus is trying to change the culture and how this African-American man is being seen. It's also about how the children are viewing their culture and growing up in their world. Romeo and Juliet, one of the big problems, as we will discover when we get to it, is that their family culture and their family society is saying, no, Romeo and Juliet can't be together. And so they have this conflict. Now, The Necklace has a little bit of this. If it weren't for this class conflict where Matilda wanted to be a part of the upper class, then maybe she wouldn't have found herself in the position she was in. Blues Ain't No Mockingbird has the class society as well, where they say like, gee, if everyone on food stamps grew their own food, we wouldn't have so many poor people. It's insulting. It was that society conflict as well. If you know anything about the Hunger Games stories, that's all about society. Maze Runner, same thing. It's about society. Lots of post-apocalyptic stories have that character versus society as well. Also, another really good genre to get into. All right. Covered this. Can a story have more than one conflict? Absolutely. Most stories do have more than one conflict at some level. Okay? So you can have character versus character, but then the storm blows in, complicating things, making things very exciting. Okay. We're going to read The Seventh Man next, and I want you to pay attention. What's the conflict? What's happening in this story? Okay? There's at least two types of conflict, which I hope you will be able to identify and explain once you are done. Lastly, I want to talk about two more words that you need to know, and hopefully you're familiar with them. The protagonist is generally the good person, the good guy in the story. It's the person that the readers care about. And the antagonist is the one causing the trouble. It's that bad guy. It doesn't always have to be the person. Like a storm could be the antagonist in the Interlopers because that's part of what adds the conflict, as well as animals and such. We get antagonist from the word antagonize, this idea of bothering, annoying, troubling. So protagonist, pro, good. Antagonist, bad. All right, that kind of covers our idea of conflict. So make sure you are familiar with these types of conflict. And as you think about stories and movies and TV shows, try and start to identify, is that an internal conflict or an external conflict? If it's an external conflict, who is the fight between? A character and a character, character and God, character and technology, character and society. See if you can figure that out. All right, I think that sums it up for me for now. Thanks for paying attention, and we'll see you around later. Bye-bye.